Peter Golder is with Dartmouth's Tuck School of Management. Before that, he was a trusted and valued colleague at NYU Stern School of Business. Peter spent the last 20 years focusing on one thing: how to determine what differentiates successful firms from those that aren't, and has emerged as one of the key voices in the field of innovation. Peter?
Thanks, everyone. Super excited to be here. This is a great event, and as Scott was saying, my professional passion for the last couple decades has been the topic of innovation. So it's fantastic for me to be here today. Like all the other speakers, I've got 9 minutes for my couple decades, so let's get to it. Basically, a lot of people think about innovation as towards the future. I want to take the opposite perspective of this, because a lot of successful innovation, I think, is actually driven by what's happened in the past. And particularly, financially successful innovations are much more about the past. People are at the technology frontier much sooner than they're at the business frontier, and trying to figure out how to leverage that technology that's developed by some others and make some money off it yourself. Those opportunities certainly exist in the past. They certainly exist today. So here's my conjecture. I'm going to try and get you to believe this by the end of my 9 minutes. The next great innovation is already on the market. Unfortunately, it's being sold by a company that will not benefit financially from that innovation. Okay? And history is replete with examples of this, and I'm going to run through a bunch of these examples. But first, I want to give you a little bit of context for the examples. So the basic product development process goes through these stages. Most people are familiar with the later part of this, which would be product life cycle. So basically, it's the kind of introduction, growth, maturity, decline, that kind of basic process. Now, what I'm mostly interested in is what's happening before that point. And that's where there's a large question mark, because we first take note of a lot of these innovations when they reach this kind of growth point. They kind of cross that chasm. They get into this high growth stage. Everybody says this is fantastic. We've got to get into this space. But what's happening before that? And that's really been the focus of my research. Where does the concept come from? The prototype. When's it first sold? When does it first find that foothold in the market? And that's what I want to talk about. Okay? So the process here takes a long time. Basically, to go from this concept just to a first prototype, there's much, much more development after this point. On average, across all the categories I've studied, 16 years. More recently, reduces to 9 years, but still quite a long period of time. To get from this next stage, the first prototype to first sale, another 10 years on average, 5 years more recently. So what's happening, right? I mean, you got to find that. We're just talking about one, right? You just got to find one person who will trade some cash for this. And it still takes a little bit of time. Now, the next stage, 10,000 units, you think, this is nothing. I mean, you don't even know about most of these products when 10,000 people are buying them. For recent categories, still 8 years to get to this point. There's a lot of development, there's a lot of innovation, and it's not just product innovation, it's business model innovation that's happening during this time. Is this good news or bad news? It's a little bit of both, right? It's bad news that it takes so long. It's bad news that it takes so long to get to that payoff, but it's good news in terms of opportunity, right? There are opportunities to be late, there are opportunities to develop these products, there are opportunities to make a lot of money in the process. The last part of the stage I want to talk about is going from this 10,000 units up to like 2% penetration. So you figure like 1 million, 2 million, somewhere in that ballpark. So this is when we first usually become aware of these products, right? When they go from this 10,000 units up to maybe 1 million people, 2 million people own these products. That's when we start to take notice, but this whole history happens before. Okay. Now, what's the bad news for the innovators in this process? Basically, if you come up with the first concept, right? So 100% of these firms have the first concept. For you to make this transition all the way from being the first with the prototype, the first to sell to anyone, or the first to sell to this niche market, which again is still just the 10,000 units, that's not the 2% penetration, there's severe attrition across this process. It is risky, but there are rewards, and again, coming late, you still have lots of opportunities to make money. Okay. Now, some examples. So, fax machine, right? So when did you first start using fax machine? Probably 1980s. It's kind of when most people. So, but this is innovation from the 60s. So that's, people say, well, that's pretty old, but the neat thing is it's the 1860s, right? Fax technology is 1860s. And here's the pictures to prove it, okay? So basically, you think about fax technology as kind of, this is part of the computer revolution, right? Faxes. It's really part of the telegraph revolution, okay? And, you know, it takes a long time for this, you know, for this to develop. But still, if you just look at this from kind of more distance, you know, newspapers in 1989, this is a revolution, right? I mean, it's a century old, but it's a revolution when it kind of hits more of a mass consciousness. Another example, digital cameras. This is kind of current, the recent awarding of the Nobel Prize in physics. But, you know, their work goes back to 1969. The principle itself is based on, you know, Einstein theorizing the relationship between, you know, light and electricity and how to digitize that. And so where's the market in this process, right? Again, when did you buy your digital camera? 1999, 1995, some of you? Well, Fairchild was selling some of them, not to consumers necessarily. 1975, they reached this 10,000 units in 1986. So these markets are around for a while. Several people have talked about this, right? So here's the part of the market we know about. Facebook, MySpace. Some people remember Friendster. Don't admit it if you're... but this, you know, 6 Degrees had friends lists. They had user profiles in 1997. Classmates.com made kind of a classic mistake in new markets, focusing on a niche, which is great to get started. But there's a much bigger market out there than people who see each other once every 5, 10, or 25 years, right? MP3 players, the previous speaker mentioned, this market developed by other companies sooner, right? Apple got into this. And one of their innovations, so to speak, was you know, iTunes. Right? So you think about this, right? Why don't we use an integrated system? Right? We've talked a lot about conversions today already to sell hardware. Right? Makes perfect sense. But in terms of like looking in the past, right? This is one of the great examples of looking in the past, because what do we see if we look in the past? Basically, this is exactly how color TVs were sold. You know, RCA owned NBC back in the day, and so NBC was the first one to push forward color programming. The NBC Peacock is kind of the legacy of this investment, and that sold a lot of TVs. That's how they made money. So you think, oh, that's great. This was nothing new either. In the 1920s, right, radio broadcasting is developed to sell radios, and this, I think, is where people, you know, think the story ends. This is kind of seen as a great business model revolution because, you know, radios up to that point were more kind of point-to-point. You had one-to-one type communication. You know, it was considered to be a great innovation to expand radio into this mass market communication, kind of open up a whole new medium. But that's, you know, that wasn't the innovation for radio because that was actually started with telephone, right? So this model now that we think is really one-to-one communication was also used for mass communication before there's radio. So this business model existed, you know, certainly before iPod, before color TV, before, you know, before radio. Goes back to telephone. So here are some of the examples of this. These concerts, you know, and things were broadcast back in the 1880s over telephone. So again, so my point, profitable invention, not just invention, but profitable invention is more about reinvention. And there's a lot to be gained by looking elsewhere. You can look to your company's past, tremendous history in there, particularly, you know, in luxury. You know, Scott started off talking about some of these timeless principles that appeal to us emotionally. There's a lot of that in our own company's past. Our competitors' present and past, there's a lot. And other industries, there's a lot. And this innovation, these insights can come from consumer needs that are timeless somewhat, this passion about something, basic needs for communication and connecting, those things exist. But new technologies emerge, they create opportunities for us, and, you know, business models have existed in the past that we can leverage today and figure out how to you know, make sense out of a world that's changing, and the past really gives us guideposts to do this and figure out how to be successful in these new markets. So that's it for today. Again, thanks for being here. My pleasure to be here.